What is your, oh crap, I've got to get the hell out of here right now story? I was solo camping in the woods during a phase where I wanted to be a survival expert. I hiked out miles from any roads or buildings, built a shelter, and then hiked back the way I came. Less than a mile away from my camp, I found a dead coyote, decapitated, gutted, and laid out like a sacrifice or something. The eyes were gouged out and it was strung across a big, flat rock. A rock which I used as a marker on the way in, so I know it hadn't been there a day before. I ran out of there as fast as I could, knife at the ready, probably 10 miles back to my house. I still have no idea who would have done it, but I know I did not want to run into them in the woods alone. Story 2. I was leaving for work at 5:30 a.m. while it was still dark. I locked the inside door handle and walked out the door, pulling the door closed behind me. As I turned around to walk off the porch toward my car, I saw 4 men jump out of a van and start coming toward me. The street was otherwise empty. My heart was pounding and I felt panic start as I was digging in my big, messy purse for my keys to unlock the door and get back into my house. The whole time, I'm just thinking about how they're going to grab me, shove me in a van, and do whatever. I was able to get back in my house before they made it to me, but it scared the crap out of me. Turns out they were immigrations officers looking for someone who used to live in our house, and that is standard practice for them if they think the suspect will run. Well, I can guarantee them that's a way to make them run, so I guess they're right in that sense. Seems needlessly aggressive, but what do I know? It's not my area of expertise. Story 3. After I graduated from college, I finally landed an interview with a guy who was starting his own company. The economy was crappy, and I so wanted a job. I went in for an interview and quickly noticed that he double-locked the door behind me. It was a small office in a strip mall. I immediately started to panic and then realized that no one else was there. He had me sit down, and 2 questions into the interview, he tried to put his hand up my skirt. I was wearing a business skirt suit. I got up and ran, and thankfully was able to open the locks and get the hell out of there. My mom accompanied me to every interview after that for a while. Edit. Here are answers to some questions. 1. My mom didn't go in with me every interview after that. She would go with me to make sure I was safe and that I felt safe, and then would wait outside. 2. I didn't report him because stupid me at the time thought it was my fault. When I ran into my car, I called my mom and she asked me to not tell my dad out of the fear that my dad would end the guy. 3. It was for an analyst role in Chicago. 4. I'm okay now. In the days after, I promised myself to never take crap from anyone, and I've kept to that promise. Story 4. I worked for an agency that helps people do their daily tasks for home health care. I had a man whose insurance prohibited personal care like a shower. He was very upset during my visit when I declined his request for bathing. I felt bad at first, but soon the man became very angry with me. He accused me of all kinds of things and started pacing around the room like he was looking for something. Between that and his spit/yelling rage, I slipped out of the house and drove to a safer place. I reported the incident to my employer and later found out that this person was an intimate offender who had previously assaulted another woman. Who knows what he was planning that day? Maybe nothing, but I'm glad I left. Story 5. I lived in South Everett, Washington for a couple of years. Was walking home from the bus stop to my apartment, which took me behind the Home Depot. Suddenly, a van starts following me. I hear the side door slide open and look behind me to see a man with the top half of his body hanging out the slider door looking at me. I took off running toward my apartment, literally running as far as I could. The van started going faster. By chance, a guy was pulling out of the driveway of my apartment complex. He sees me running for my life and stops. The van immediately turns around and speeds off. Guy asks if I'm okay. I ask him to just stay there and please watch me walk into my apartment, which was the building next to his. He did, thank God. I started carrying a mace and a very large knife the next day. Well, if anything's going to tell you you have to get the hell out of there, someone chasing you in a van with a sliding door, that's a pretty good reason. That is a pretty good reason to want to get the hell out of there. This sounds horrifying, OP, so sorry you had to go through this. Oh my God. Story 6. My ex-husband came into our bedroom where I was sleeping and screamed into my ear, "You and your mom need to stop playing mind games with me." Understand, I didn't speak to him much to not set him off. He hadn't spoken to my mom in 3 months. Without looking at him, I walked downstairs in the dark to sleep on the couch. As I was laying down, a big ceramic lamp flew by my head and smashed against the wall. He followed me downstairs and I didn't hear him because the dogs came with me, and their collars jingled loud enough so I couldn't hear him. He'd been abusive, but after throwing a heavy lamp at my head in the dark, I knew he would end me. I couldn't leave that night because he took my keys, but I ran away to a safe house as soon as he left the house. Story 7. I was in Thailand back in 2010, on the southern islands after full moon party. My friend and I were talking to 2 girls who invited us to play poker. We went and sat down with 2 German guys and 2 burly Thai guys full of tattoos and began to play. They were joking, friendly, and the buy-in was $10. We lost some pots, won some pots, and overall, happy experience. The Thai guys beat us, and on the last hand, I managed to claw my chips back to about $8. My friend was looking tired, so I gave him the nod. I thanked them for the game and said we would cash out and we'd be on our way. The Thai guys put a machete on the table and told us to screw off. My friend, myself, and the 2 German guys noped out of that situation as fast as we could. On the way back, the girls caught up with us and apologized, but it meant nothing, because they were clearly in on the take. Lesson learned, if pretty girls ask you to play a game, it's for nefarious reasons. Story 8. When I was 17, I met with a 23-year-old guy for a mall date. Can't remember his name for the life of me. I'd just gotten out of a horrible relationship and was trying to distract myself. We had dinner, and when the waiter brought the check, the guy told me he had forgotten his wallet in his car, and that if I went with him, he could grab it. I told him it was fine and paid for the meal myself. We went into a couple shops, but he kept asking me questions about my ex-boyfriend. Also, he mentioned that he'd been in jail, but wouldn't tell me what for. I was nervous. Then things came to a head when he kept saying, "Hey, just come to my car for a second, please. Let's listen to music," and kept getting increasingly anxious every time I declined. I was so scared. I immediately pretended to have a period emergency so I could get out of there, and luckily I parked in a different lot than he did. I still have no idea what his intentions were, but man, that was horrifying. Look, 17, 23, it's a suspicious age gap, I'll say that much. I don't think this man's intentions were the best. If you are anxious around someone and they ask you to move to a secondary location, secluded one perhaps, don't do anything you can to not really, because the more insistent they are about it, the worse their intentions are usually. And also just trust your gut. It might not be harmful, but it might be. Why take that chance? Anyway, I don't need to explain this to people, they know. But I'm just saying, OP did the right thing here. That dude is creepy. Story 9. Some dude in my uni class. Trying not to sound non-inclusive here, but he was a special case. Kept talking about his screwed up life. Some things he had done that made people fear him because he was unpredictable were bringing a knife into class and placing it casually on the desk. One of those big frick-off Rambo ones. A girl in class was one of those mouthy types. Talked to him and he responded by getting her in a chokehold and threatening her, and smashed a pint glass over his head for no apparent reason other than to show that he could. Ended up in the hospital. Everyone stayed the frick away from him, but only added to his paranoia. Everyone graduated and I stayed in that city for a bit. Bumped into him by accident in my gym. He told me I was one of the few who he didn't want to stab. I kept myself out of others' business, but he took it as a sign of friendship and wanted to follow me back to my apartment to hang out. Told him I was going to work after gym. Never went to that gym again after that. Story 10. I was walking to my house from my ex's house very early in the morning when I saw this little girl with a backpack running for her life from 2 big street dogs. At that moment, I didn't think, and I ran towards the dogs and missed a kick. The 2 dogs came after me, biting my legs and arm. They were out of control, and these were like the longest 5 minutes of my life. I couldn't stop them from biting me. The little girl kept running until I didn't see her anymore. It was just me and the dogs attacking me. I tried to climb a fence to get inside a house, but I couldn't. When a taxi driver stopped and went out of his car with a short stick and he tried to scare them off, giving me a chance to run. Without thinking, I got inside the car. The guy just ran a couple of times around the car with the dogs behind until he got in and drove off like really fast. He took me to the hospital where I got a lot of stitches on my legs, arms, and hands. That guy is my hero. Every now and then I go to his taxi stop and give them sandwiches or something. We never knew what happened to those dogs. OP, taxi driver isn't just your hero, taxi driver is a hero. Like, that's awesome. This person has the absolute friggin' gonads to do something like that. I would be terrified. I would want to do something about it. I don't know what I would actually do in the situation, though. This person went out and did it. Huge W. Got you to the hospital after too? That's amazing. This guy rocks. Story 11. One time I was driving through Kansas in the middle of the night with my girlfriend on a road trip. Summer of 17, I think. We had issues with the car breaking down in Nebraska and were sputtering along until we reached Colby, Kansas. We waited for night so the roads were less busy. As we were driving along, not Highway 70 but just south to stay off the highways, a semi caught up to us. The car didn't want to go past 50 or 60 miles per hour, and I didn't want to push it and break down. Needless to say, I was going too slow for the semi. For an entire hour, this guy is riding my butt, flashing his lights, etc. Never honked his horns, though. I would slow down and pull off to the side a little bit to let him pass, but every time I did, he would slow down too and give me a ton of space. It's now about 2 or 3 a.m. We are in the middle of nowhere coming up close to the border of Colorado. He is constantly riding up to my butt and turning his lights on and off again. We finally come across a gas station and I pull over to a pump on the right side. I cannot emphasize how literal I mean by middle of nowhere. It's flat deserts forever in all directions. It's an empty shell gas station that is closed and dark as hell. We hope the truck will just pass us and we pretend to pump gas. This fricking truck slows all the way down and stops right there on the road next to us. He proceeds to back his truck up enough to pull into the gas station behind us, perpendicular to our car. I start losing my mind and looking around. I'm standing outside of my car and my girlfriend is screaming for me to get back in. This guy gets out of the semi and starts walking directly towards us. He's only about 50 yards away when I notice a small brown pickup truck sitting on the backside of the shell, eerily placed. I notice there's someone in it. I run towards him. As I get closer, I realize there's a police badge painted on the side of this brown pickup, and the man inside is an officer. I can only imagine what this guy on late night duty was thinking when I'm running up to him. He rolls down his window with a confused look on his face. My girlfriend is screaming at me in panic as this guy gets within 10 yards of the car, while I'm spitting about 50 words out of my mouth in 2 seconds explaining our situation. The officer doesn't say a word, just drives around our car. The man notices and does an immediate U-turn back to his truck. As the officer's yelling at him to stop, I hop back into my car, look in the rearview mirror for a second, and see the officer getting out to try to talk to this guy. I turn on the car, hit the gas, and drive into Colorado a few minutes later. I will spend the rest of my night wondering what would have happened if that officer wasn't sitting right there that night. Whoever you are, man, bless your soul. Story 12. I woke up one Friday in a hotel and the internet was down. I went to the hotel lobby to see what was up, and saw scenes of chaos on the TV. A crowd had started to gather to watch, including the hotel staff. One employee told me the government had shut down the internet to test it. The scenes on the TV were of violent protests beginning all over Egypt, as people made their first push to occupy Tahrir Square. It was January 25th, 2011, and I was in Benghazi, Libya, without my US passport. Needless to say, I spent my energy over the next few days trying to get out of the country. I was able to leave, but many of the people I was working with weren't as lucky. The revolution started in Benghazi less than 2 weeks later. It was surreal watching Anderson Cooper broadcasting live from the hotel I had just been staying in. Edit. Bunch of people asked about my passport, so I'll elaborate further. I'm actually paranoid about giving up my passport when I travel, so it was an odd story how that happened. It was my second trip, and I always brought color copies of my passport to give when someone asked for it, so I never had to hand over the original. My first trip I traveled with someone who had been to Libya multiple times. I'm an architect and we were working for a Turkish contractor. They requested the passport the first trip to get a stamp. I initially refused and said I would do it myself if needed. The other architect was more senior, and explained they just used a runner to take it to the police station and get a stamp, which was required if your stay is longer than a week. He showed me his, so I backed down and let them have it. I got it back that day and it had the stamp. On my second trip, they requested the passport for the same process, but I still didn't have it back by the third day when the internet was shut off. I called our company from the hotel to get a plane ticket to Istanbul. The next flight was on a Saturday afternoon. The client had my passport and didn't want us to leave because they were afraid we would trigger a panic at the job site, so they kept claiming they didn't have my passport back yet. We ended up in a full-blown shouting match demanding it back when we were in danger of missing the flight out. They finally gave it back after we started threatening to call our company and walk away from the project. The stress didn't end there, because my passport didn't have the stamp once it was returned. I was stopped when going through customs trying to leave, and it was clear they were having a conversation about the missing stamp. They ended up letting me go, but I didn't feel like I could take a breath till I was in the air. I'd been communicating with a close friend via text throughout all this. I didn't want to worry my wife about the situation. He knew to contact her if I stopped responding. I called her that Saturday night from Istanbul to tell her what had happened, and that I was no longer in the country. Story 13. I was the only white guy working at a Hispanic restaurant, and I don't speak Spanish, and that's part of it. One night after work, I get invited to drink at one of their houses. All is going good, we're drinking, and I even danced a bit. Then, after going outside to the back patio to smoke a cigarette, I come back inside, and the guy whose house I was at has a knife and is yelling at these 3 coworkers of mine, blocking the front door, yelling in Spanish that no one is leaving. I knew that much. A bar patron who knew me grabbed me and pleaded to the guy to just let me and him out, since we had no part of it. The homeowner lets us both out. I ask the bar patron, what the hell was that when we're outside, because I can't speak Spanish. And he says the guy thinks my 3 coworkers are sleeping with his wife and he's probably about to murder them. I got in my car and got the hell out of there. That bar patron made a Hail Mary move, and it worked out, so that's good. But oh man, the fact that actually worked kind of baffles me. Story 14. My parents liked going to the backyard gatherings of their friends, which were thinly veiled excuses to get drunk. They dragged us kids all along for some reason, but I never cared much for sitting around watching a bunch of adults get hammered. There was always something stupid that happened, and more often than not, it was violent. Now, you have to understand that these friends that they were associated with were scum. Wannabe gangsters, drunks and addicts, petty thieves, domestic abusers, and one ex-convict who claimed that he had helped murder kid touchers in prison. Just all around the very picture of the dregs of our modern society. The night in question had the full cast of lowlives freshly scraped from the bottom of the barrel and put into one backyard, and in hindsight, There's no way something wouldn't happen. It all started when one guy put his hands on his wife. The ex-con guy didn't take too kindly to that and punched him out. This guy's buddy got up to square off, and so did the ex-con's buddy. It quickly devolved into yelling and exchanged blows until one of the guys who lived next door came out with a freaking chainsaw. So I'm inside the house on this property and hear people yelling, screaming, and a pregnant woman who was crying ran in with some kids. I sat there bewildered until my parents ran in, both seeming almost sober from the adrenaline. They essentially told my brothers and I that we needed to go now. So we stayed at a cousin's house close by because they were really in no condition to drive, and to this day, I refuse to go to any of those really crappy gatherings. Story 15. I was living in France on my own and got a tutoring client. First session, he offers to drive me home. Spends the entire time asking about a boyfriend, where I live, etc. Second session, he wants to give me a tour of his house. I noticed he was standing in the door when we went into a room. Once we got to the second floor, I grabbed his daughter so nothing would happen. After that, I tried to quit and he guilted me into coming 3 more times. Every time I got so anxious beforehand, I wanted to puke. Every time he would offer a ride and I took the 2 hours of buses instead. Finally, I fully broke it off. I knew something bad was going to happen, and confirmed it with a few other young English-speaking women I knew. He was recruiting at best his second wife, but they all got extremely bad feelings being alone with him. Story 16. Senior year of high school, and a friend of mine and I decided to explore a pioneer cemetery near the railroad tracks after dark on a Halloween night. We were totally sober and just looking for a good way to scare ourselves. To get there, you have to park off an unlit road that is at the end of an abandoned industrial area and walk about a quarter of a mile on an unmaintained dirt road. Bushes overgrown, weeds up to your waist, etc. before you get to the cemetery. We brought no flashlights, just to use the light of the moon to make our way. We were almost there and had been whispering and giggling the whole way, when all of a sudden, we both got quiet at the same time. I felt this overwhelming sense of doom hit my whole body at once, and I stopped in my tracks. She did the same. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt like someone had poured a bucket of ice water down my back. My heart was racing. My friend and I were just looking around and listening, and her eyes were so wide that when I looked at her, I could make them out perfectly in the darkness. We stayed like that for about a minute, just listening and hearing nothing. I said to her loudly, "We should probably get back to your brother in the truck. I'm sure he's mad we're taking so long," thinking a good bluff would make me feel better. Just over my shoulder from behind a tall bush, but I swear, it sounded like it was right inside my ear. A man's voice said quietly, "Yeah, you probably should." We both just turned and ran as fast as we could back to her truck. It felt like an eternity to get there, and we both threw open the doors and jumped inside. She jammed the key in the ignition and started it, but being a new driver and terrified, she kept letting the clutch out too soon and the engine would die. Finally, after about 5 attempts, she got the engine going and we tore out of there and back to my house. During that whole run, I was terrified to look behind me. I didn't look out the window as we were trying to drive away either. We, being young and foolish, laughed about it later and almost convinced ourselves it didn't happen. A few years later, I was talking to a sheriff from the county and told him the story. He looked at me like I was a total idiot and said there was a huge homeless encampment there for years due to the proximity of the railroad tracks and the relative isolation in an urban area, small grocery store and other resources within walking distance, etc. They used to patrol that area frequently because of that encampment. I think my friend and I were lucky we didn't get ourselves into more trouble than we did that night. Man, we were naive. I understand the sense of adventure and the thrill and it's fun and spooky for a Halloween night. Sure. No flashlight? That's a bit foolish. Not telling anyone about it or asking about it beforehand, also a little foolish. You and your friend are a little lucky with how you got out of that, but also a cool example of gut feeling kind of saving you. That intuition that something is wrong and you both knew it, but neither of you know why. As creepy as it is, it's kind of cool. Story 17. St. Patrick's Day midnight. I, 26 at the time, female, was walking home from the Irish bar I worked in. I saw a lad attack a girl and run. I checked on her to make sure she was all right. Stayed with her until the police arrived. Gave my statement and told them I was nervous about walking home. 2 guys who were on the scene offered to walk me home. Policeman said, "There you go, you're sorted." Yeah, that's right. Sent me off with 2 strangers. I scolded myself for being so nervous. Told myself it was really nice of them to offer to walk me home. We were about halfway to my house when they started talking about what they'd witnessed. How the girl deserved to be attacked and their friend, the attacker, had done nothing wrong. My spidey senses weren't just tingling, they were electric. We were coming up to the last populated street before the dark alleyway and then park that I needed to walk through to get home. If I kept walking with these guys, I was in danger. I knew I was in danger. I checked my phone and told them my friend was conveniently in the nearest club just across the road. I thanked them for their offer to walk me home and headed to the club entry before they could say anything. Jumped in a taxi, and as we drove past the alleyways, these guys were waiting. They'd called my bluff about going into the club and were watching for me. I don't know what they would have done to me, but that's my biggest listen to your instincts story, and I'm really freaking glad I did. I was kicking myself because my manager, who was also my friend / mutual crush, had offered to walk me home, but I didn't want him having to walk all the way home himself in the other direction after. Wow, it sure was nice of these guys to just put huge giant red warning signs on themselves. Not only are these guys probably just absolute scumbags, they're idiots too. I guess you kind of have to be that level of scumbag, but still, they're so gross and stupid. You know what? I don't have anything more to say. I could rant about this forever and just go in circles, but that's not what you're here for. You're here for stories. Moving on. Story 18. I'd recently moved to another country and met an American guy with whom I decided to go drinking in a small village with about half an hour away from the city where we both lived. We had a few beers, some laughs, a little karaoke, and decided to call it a night. My seal had broken much earlier in the night, and in the taxi on the way home, nature called once more. I tried to hold it in as long as I could, but it was a beer pee after all. At this point, I only knew a few words in the local language. So I asked my pal, who was fluent, to translate to the driver that I'd appreciate if he would pull over so I could relieve myself. I've learned since that the locals have a habit of A, pretending they don't understand foreigners if it inconveniences them, B, make no effort to listen when a foreigner speaks because they assume they won't understand, or C, genuinely don't understand due to pronunciation and/or quirks related to different local dialects. I have no idea which of the aforementioned language barriers occurred on this particular night, but the driver continued to ignore the American even after he repeated himself numerous times. I had finally resigned myself to the fact I was going to have to either hold it in or pee myself in the back seat of this dude's cab, when suddenly the American, fed up with what he wrongly or rightly perceived as being ignored, grabs the wheel of the car and spins us off the road. We go hurtling into a field. The driver slams on the brakes. We narrowly avoid smashing headfirst into a tree. For the next 30 seconds or so, I have no idea what happened, because I immediately jumped out of the car to ease my bladder. After the jubilation of my release had worn off, it finally occurred to me, what the hell just occurred? I looked up and saw the American guy scuffling with the taxi driver that he had just scared half to death. He broke free and we started across the field. About 500 meters away from the car, he realized he left his bag, including his passport, in the car. He went back and I left. I hitchhiked for around 10 minutes along the road until someone picked me up. I later discovered that the guy was an ex-Marine with the words, "I will end you," tattooed across his chest. The armed forces had seriously screwed him up and he had huge anger issues. I always found him pleasant enough, but after that experience, I kept a little distance. As to what happened after he returned to the car, I never got the full story. I expect he had to pay reparations to the driver and a bribe to the police. I don't know if I would trust someone at all after that. The intentions may have been good, but oh man was the execution bad. Head-on colliding with a tree could have done some serious damage to you all. It's not worth the risk for a pee you have to take, I gotta be honest. This guy's threat assessment was not peak. Story 19. Living in Baltimore some years back, and I was driving home through a rough area of the city. Sitting at a stoplight behind an already stopped car, another pulls up next to me on the right. Not really thinking anything of this, the light turns green. Neither of these cars move, and I see a car zipping up behind me. I look to my left and see two guys running towards me. I am so thankful I left a good deal of space between me and the car in front. I hooked it around the car in front and sped off. Pretty sure I was going to be the victim of a carjacking or maybe something worse. Glad they ill-timed their plan and I gave myself that space. Lesson here is always keep your head on a swivel in Baltimore. Story 20. I was on a placement in a very conservative part of Egypt. As foreigners, we had to have armed guards to escort us around. Men and women were not allowed to touch each other and women were to be covered up. I met a guy out there and we were both desperate to be close. We couldn't help but hold hands briefly walking down the street. The guards suddenly called us over and mentioned for us to get in their truck. There were about 4 of them with big, loaded guns. They didn't speak great English, so we had no idea what was going on. It was pitch black, and as they drove us out of the main town, I started to get scared. This was 2 weeks after some bombings. We came to what looked like a big abandoned military compound and they drove inside. They told us to get out and ushered us toward a pier. As we walked down the pier, they got a couple of chairs out and sat down, staring at us. At this point, I literally pictured us on Al Jazeera thinking we were about to be executed and dumped in the Nile. Slowly, we realized that wasn't the plan and relaxed a bit. We walked to the end of the pier and enjoyed a kiss. We decided they probably just took us here because they could see we wanted to get closer and for them it was probably novel or interesting. The relief was overwhelming. I'm partly torn on this one because on one hand, it's kind of, I don't know, is a goofy decision to do public displays of affection of any kind in a place you know doesn't like that. You can disagree with the rules and think they're goofy or whatever. I do. But you still have to kind of do the rules, you know? Just because you really want to do something doesn't, I don't know, absolve you, in their eyes, I mean. I'm not saying OP did anything morally wrong, just in the eyes of the people who lived there or the customs of the culture, they did. Anyway, what I'm saying, kind of silly to do that. Crazier, though, to get driven by some people with, like, firearms to appear and then kiss on the... My brain is breaking. I can't even imagine this happening. This is so strange. Maybe that means I'm just not worldly, but this seems just really out there to me. If OP was right and their intention was just for them to get closer, why there? Also, what happened to, like, private places? If you want to get closer in a private place. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something, but I'm just really confused about this one. Story 21. Cousin and I went cruising around late one evening around 1 a.m. This was deep country. We decided on just taking random roads and ended up in a clearing with a single house. You could see a glow in the backyard, too big to be a campfire. Looked like a barn fire from the glow. As we kept driving, my cousin had this feeling and cut the lights. The moon and glow of the fire lit the road ahead some. As we approached the other side of the house, we saw not a barn fire, but a cross on fire. There were about 5 guys in robes, and they were looking right at us. Cousin blew a Yui and we gunned it. We did not know what was up ahead could have been a dead end. As we went for the wood line, I looked back to see their truck lights turn on. Cousin didn't slow down at all, even through the wooded road. You could see their lights through the brush. After about a minute or two, we hit the main road and he gunned it hard. Looked back and the guys were about to get to the main road themselves. Cousin cut the lights and made a left past the cemetery. Drove without lights, only using the moon. As we got to the top of the hill, the truck lights were barely visible, but they finally got to the cemetery intersection and we saw tail lights. They went right. My cousin kept the lights off for a bit till we got close to home. As we pulled in the driveway, our adrenaline started to come down. Never did we think we would crash a clan gathering, let alone be chased by them. We did go back during the day about 3 months later to see if we could find any information, but the house looked abandoned, like years without anyone living there. So we figured it was just a meeting place for their meetings, nice and secluded with a single road that passes by. We did check out where the road led to, and it was a heavy rutted road that twisted and turned till you got to a major highway. So Ewing was the right choice. We would have been caught. When OP started describing a fire that was too big to be a campfire, I had an inkling. Then I remembered they were in deep country, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I think I know where this one is going. That is nuts. Also, kind of confusing why they would chase them, though. Like, what are they worried about exactly? I don't get that part, but I'm glad that OP and his buddy got out. Being chased by some Klansmen is, definitely one for the history books. Like, personal history books, like autobiography books, I guess. Story 22. I was in early high school, and for an easy high school job, I did some yard work for some of my neighbors. There was one older guy 2 doors down who asked me to pull some weeds, weed eat his backyard fence, and push mow the yard. I finished this and was told to come back that evening so he could get cash to pay me. So far, you may be wondering why I'm posting this, but it gets strange. I went over later and he had clearly been drinking, and I had to listen to him for 15-ish minutes while he looked for the cash he supposedly just got. Then he kept getting closer to me and asked me to come down to his man cave to help him set up his Wii, and that he would pay me a little more. I grabbed the cash and hightailed it out of there and never spoke to him again. I have never been more creeped out by another human being. Story 23. I'm in the shower in a hotel and the fire alarm goes off. I was on my honeymoon, so I quickly get dressed and my wife and I run down 7 flights of stairs. We open the door and exit and see the staff just chilling. They see we're a little concerned and tell us that it was just a drill for staff only and that there was a sheet of paper near the elevator explaining this. So maybe it was my fault or maybe they could have been a little better at communicating. Either way, it scared the crap out of me. They sort of laughed like, "Aw, poor things." I was hungover as hell and not really that happy, but I brushed it off. Ha ha. A fire alarm going off when I am like in the bathroom doing any bathroom related activities is definitely an irrational fear of mine. I always think it's gonna happen for some reason. Or like it's always in the back of my mind, I guess. Of like, what would I even do? And simple answer is, right now, I still don't know. A shower, obviously I'd try to dry myself off best I could, I guess, and throw some clothes on and get out there. But that's just unlucky timing, man. With that kind of panic, I'm not surprised they didn't see a paper next to the elevator. I think the hotel should have communicated things a bit better. Also, What do you mean a staff-only drill? That seems really strange to me. I don't know. I would have done exactly what OP did here, though. I would have not noticed the paper and I would have just gunned it. Because I'm worried it's a fire alarm. Without any indication it's a drill, how am I supposed to know that I'm not in danger? Anyway, it's more of a lighthearted one to end things off, which is good because we're out of stories. For now, though, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.